You know that thing we all do where you're like in the shower or maybe driving home from work and you're replaying an argument you had earlier in the day?
Oh, yeah. Like the classic staircase wit.
Exactly. And in this mental replay, you have the absolute perfect comeback. You're calm, you're insightful, you see right through the other person's defenses. And you basically walk away looking like a total genius.
Right, because in our own heads, we're always the undisputed champion of the conversation.
I mean, obviously. But now imagine taking that exact feeling, that unshakable certainty that you are just the smartest, most perceptive person in the room, and expanding it into a massive 350,000 character manuscript.
It is honestly a staggering amount of text.
It really is. So for today's deep dives, we've taken this unpublished beast of a book, which is titled Sweet Love of Duality, and we fed it to 3 distinct AI reviewers.
We used Claude, Gemini, and Grok.
Right. And they aren't just critiquing a story here. They are dissecting what happens when a writer basically bleeds their own ego out onto the page.
It's just such a fascinating psychological experiment because, we aren't looking at a polished, traditionally published novel. We are looking at this gritty, highly autobiographical, philosophical factory novel that is, well, it's deeply messy.
Super messy. And these 3 AI models were unleashed on the text with just zero mercy.
None at all. And their critical lenses expose this really incredible tension. It's this clash between the brilliant, grounded realism of the setting and the crushing ego of an author who is trying to write themselves as the flawless hero.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because before we get into the flaws of this manuscript, we really have to talk about why Claude and Grog explicitly argue that this sprawling book is actually worth reading.
Yeah, we have to give credit where it's due.
For sure. Because underneath all the self-importance, there is a visceral, breathing world here. We are dropped into a post-Yugoslav industrial factory canteen, and this place serves 2,000 people every single day.
That is a massive scale for a kitchen.
Right. And the author doesn't just describe the setting. You can practically feel the grease on the floor. You can, smell the burnt onions.
Claude's review actually zeroed in specifically on those opening sensory details, like the author describes the pneumatic brakes of the factory buses outside and how they sound like they are apologizing to the workers.
Oh, I love that line.
It's so good.
Yeah.
Or the way the soul-crushing fluorescent lights hit these exhausted faces at 2 in the morning. Claude notes that this isn't a writer performing grit for, a literary audience.
Yeah, it doesn't feel forced.
Exactly. It isn't trying to be poetic or romantic about poverty or the daily grind. It just is.
There's one detail Claude highlighted that I just haven't been able to stop thinking about.
Yeah.
There's this girl in a red scarf on the factory floor.
Oh, right, the music scene.
Yeah, she hears a song playing over the loudspeakers, and for a brief moment, she lifts her chin to the music to show what the text calls 2 seconds of spine.
Wow.
And then she just drops her head right back into the machinery of her shift.
What's fascinating here is how that specific moment works on a mechanical level. It's brilliant because of its restraint. The author completely trusts the image to do the emotional heavy lifting.
Right, we don't get a lecture.
No, exactly. We don't get a long internal monologue about the crushing weight of capitalism. We just get 2 seconds of spine and then the surrender. That level of observational storytelling, it proves the author has actually stood in a kitchen doorway watching night shift workers file into a life they didn't choose.
It totally reminds me of a gritty, high-definition documentary.
Yeah.
Just hidden inside a novel. And there's another character beat that completely proves your point about restraint.
Is it the Slipknot moment?
Yes. So our protagonist, Viktor, who is this 43-year-old canteen cook, is listening to a Slipknot song in the kitchen.
Which is heavy stuff for a kitchen.
Right. And right before a lyric comes on that references self-harm, Viktor just casually reaches over and turns the volume down. He does it specifically so the women working in the kitchen, who might have their own traumas and might flinch at that imagery, just don't have to hear it.
Notice what the author doesn't do there. He doesn't have Viktor explain his empathy to the reader.
Yeah, there's no big speech about why he did it.
And he doesn't have another character praise him for it either.
Yeah.
It is functional empathy, not performative empathy. When an author grounds a character in mundane, protective actions like that, it establishes immense trust with the reader.
Which makes it so incredibly jarring when we hit the wall of unreality that is the rest of Viktor's character.
Yeah, the contrast is intense.
Because if the kitchen feels incredibly real, the hero feels entirely fake.
We really have to talk about the Viktor problem.
It is basically the central paradox of the manuscript. A book obsessed with truth features a protagonist who just doesn't feel like a real human being.
Viktor acts less like a guy making industrial quantities of stew and more like a non-dual Zen master. Oh, completely.
And for anyone listening who might not be familiar with that term, he essentially walks around acting perfectly enlightened. He's completely detached from the petty dramas of the world, spouting Advaita philosophy, which is like a school of Hindu thought focused on the ultimate oneness of everything.
And the AI models did not let him get away with it.
Oh, the critiques from Gemini and Claude absolutely skewer him for this. Gemini savagely describes Viktor as a walking, talking philosophy textbook dropped into a vat of industrial bay leaves.
That is such a Gemini description. But Claude goes even deeper into the structural mechanics of why Viktor is so insufferable. The review points out that Viktor is, without fail, the smartest and most competent man in every single room he enters.
Always.
Always. He deflects every HR interrogation with these perfectly timed epigrammatic quips.
Oh, the HR scene. Okay, so there's a hostile HR woman investigating him. He just casually dubs her a librarian of reputations right to her face.
Which is such a wild thing to say.
Right. And instead of firing him, or even just fighting back, she just walks away faster than usual. Or there's this guy named Petrovich who was a rival in his philosophy class. Viktor just completely outsmarts him at every single turn. The whole world simply bends to accommodate Viktor's cleverness.
Every opponent flinches. Nobody ever has a comeback. And Claude brilliantly diagnoses this specific flaw as the autobiography tax.
Okay, I am struggling with this a little bit, though.
How so?
Well, if this manuscript is highly autobiographical, and the author really did outsmart his philosophy rival Petrovich in real life, and he really did say that exact line to the HR rep, isn't truth the whole point?
I see what you're saying.
Yeah, like, if you are writing an autobiographical novel, why is it bad to write down exactly how you won an argument? We love hyper-competent heroes, right? We love Batman and James Bond. Why do these reviewers hate Viktor's clarity so much?
It's a great question, and it really gets to the core of narrative truth versus literal truth. Let's think about the listener for a second. Think about the last time you told a story about a bad breakup or a workplace conflict to your friends over drinks.
You probably glossed over your own bad behavior.
Exactly. You probably edited out the part where you were totally unreasonable, you framed the story so your actions made sense, and the other person looked crazy. We all pay the autobiography tax in our daily lives because we naturally gravitate toward making ourselves right. In our memory, we felt right.
So we basically want to be the hero of our own memory.
Yes, the author genuinely felt that clarity in those real-life meetings. But Claude points out that fiction has to be more unjust than life to feel true.
Wait, more unjust?
Yeah. In real life, you might occasionally drop a perfect comeback and leave someone speechless through sheer luck. But in a narrative, if a hero's clarity always wins and every opponent always capitulates, it ceases to be an honest exploration of truth. It degrades into pure self-flattery.
Ah, I get it. So narrative truth requires consequences.
Yes, exactly. In the real world, if you give a snarky, philosophical comeback to an HR rep, they don't walk away in awe of your intellect. They fire you.
Right, you're out of a job.
The manuscript would be infinitely more powerful if Viktor's absolute clarity actually cost him something. Like, if he was right but it ruined his life anyway. Because he is shielded from consequences, he becomes untouchable.
And this invulnerability doesn't just make Viktor an annoying character. It actively infects the plot. Because if the protagonist can't be challenged or hurt, where is the tension? Which brings us to the plot catalyst.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, Gemini hilariously dubs it the Great Napkin Threat of 2026.
The inciting incident that fails to incite literally anything.
Precisely. So Viktor is working in this massive factory kitchen, and someone leaves him a threat written in block marker on a white napkin. It says, "Turn the music down or I'll turn you off."
Very dramatic.
Super dramatic. Now, any normal human being or even a compelling fictional character might treat an assassination threat with at least a tiny bit of urgency. But Viktor...
He's entirely unfazed.
Completely. He tucks the napkin into his chef's jacket like a souvenir, turns the Slipknot music up, and thinks to himself, "Cowards scribble, killers move."
As Gemini rightly points out in its review, if an anonymous syndicate wants to assassinate a canteen cook over his Spotify playlist, they have a terrible business model.
Seriously, the stakes are so absurd. But Viktor treats himself like he's James Bond.
It is peak high-functioning rebellion nonsense, and because the plot is so thin and the protagonist is so unbothered, the author tries to compensate with the prose itself.
The writing starts to buckle.
Completely buckles under the weight of Viktor's self-importance. We get descriptions of back doors that scream like they regret letting you out.
Oh, and we get fear that is so visible you could slice it and serve it with bread.
So overly dramatic.
And my personal favorite, spilled wine that glows darkly in the shape of a question mark.
What's happening mechanically there is a classic symptom of authorial insecurity.
Really? How so?
Well, when a writer is subconsciously aware that their plot lacks genuine tension, or they are just insecure about the mundane nature of a canteen kitchen, they overcompensate.
Right.
They don't trust the setting to speak for itself.
Ah, so that's how you get metaphorical soups, like fear you can slice with bread.
Exactly. They force every single object in the room to work triple time as a symbol, just to prove to the reader, look how deep and meaningful this all is.
It's like when you try to explain a vivid dream to a friend, and because the actual events of the dream sound boring out loud, you start exaggerating how intense it felt to make them care.
That is a perfect analogy. And this need to prove how deep the story is brings us to the central metaphor that actually gives the book its title, Sweet Love of Duality.
Here's where it gets really interesting, right? So there's this recurring Jungian concept in the manuscript called the monster under the bed.
Right, Carl Jung.
Yeah, for context, Carl Jung was a psychoanalyst who wrote extensively about the shadow, the repressed, darker parts of our psyche that we have to integrate to become whole. In the book, the monster represents that unnamed feeling of duality.
And Claude notes that the initial flashback, where a 10-year-old Viktor actually meets this monster, is genuinely effective.
Because the child is actually vulnerable.
It's effective because the child is vulnerable, yes. But then we return to adult Viktor. And the problem is, adult Viktor has already integrated his monster. He has already done all this deep psychological homework and filed his feelings away neatly before the book even starts.
Which raises a massive problem for the structure of a novel. If Viktor has already integrated his monster and solved his internal crisis, what are we doing here for 350,000 words? Where is the actual conflict?
This raises an important question regarding how internal conflict drives a narrative.
Yeah.
A compelling story requires a protagonist who is actively grappling with something unresolved.
They need a struggle.
Because Viktor's psychological integration is presented as a completed past event, he's just static. He walks around the factory diagnosing everyone else's unintegrated monsters with perfect clarity. He points out their flaws, while his own monster never bites him.
It's like watching a surgeon operate on everyone else in the room while claiming he himself doesn't have any organs.
A true exploration of duality, a true sweet love of duality, requires loving the part of yourself that fails.
The messy parts.
The part that is wrong, the part that cannot see its own blind spots. The author wants to celebrate the part of Viktor that perfectly chops onions while quoting ancient philosophy, but refuses to let him be genuinely flawed or defeated by his own darkness.
So if the external plot of the Nazcan threat doesn't challenge him, and his internal philosophical journey is already finished, who actually challenges Viktor in this book?
This brings us to a really fascinating dynamic.
Yeah, the women in his life. Ironically, his romantic partners.
Ah, yes. What Grok brilliantly termed the Greek chorus of X's.
Grok's analysis of the dialogue here is just devastating. Grok actually pulled out specific passages to show how the author turns romantic wreckage into a literal stage play, where the women exist primarily to reflect Viktor's supposedly beautiful wounds.
Right, there are three main women, aren't there?
Yeah. We are introduced to Jasna, the immediate ex, then Mila, who is written with this hyper-poetic tragic flair, and Sarah, who gets a massive performative spirituality backstory.
And how do they actually function in the narrative? Like, do they have their own agency, or do they just exist to validate Viktor?
Oh, they completely exist to validate him. Mila actually has a line of dialogue where she tells Viktor she feels like she's forgetting her lines in the stage production of life. And Sarah returns at the very end of the book just to admit that Viktor was right about her all along. She literally says to him, "You like the shawl more than the fire."
I mean, we've all had that fantasy where exes come back and admit we were right all along. It is the ultimate fantasy of the wounded ego. But when you write an entire narrative universe organized around confirming the protagonist's correctness, the other characters stop being human. People who doubted Viktor inevitably return to confess their error. It's a structural habit of the book that robs Jasna, Mila, and Sarah of any real dimensionality.
But, and this is a massive pivot, There is actually a saving grace in this manuscript.
Thank goodness.
Right. And it isn't the dialogue, it isn't the romance, and it certainly isn't the philosophy. It's the food. I want to contrast what the critiques call philosophy Viktor, the insufferable Zen master, with ladle Viktor.
Little Victor is where the true beating heart of this manuscript lies.
It really is night and day. When Viktor stops monologuing about duality and just starts cooking, the prose tightens up and the whole book transforms.
There's that one sequence with the stew.
Yes. Viktor is cooking a massive industrial batch of stew. And it's dangerously close to being served late, which is a huge deal in a factory of 2,000 hungry workers. But he pushes it past the point of redemption anyway. He takes the risk to make sure the food is actually good and the people are fed.
He stops being a philosopher and finally becomes a provider.
And it changes his interactions with the women, too. There's a scene where he gives a piece of bread to his ex, Jasna. And for once, he doesn't weaponize the gesture.
He's not trying to teach a lesson.
Right. He isn't trying to win an argument or prove he's more enlightened than her. He is just giving her bread. There's even a moment where he uses a paprika jar to hide evidence, which Grok hilariously calls a Chekhov's gun-firing soup in truth.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, what the author is successfully exploring through Ladle Victor is the ethics of food. Feeding people is arguably the most basic, fundamental form of respect.
It's universal.
And in a soul-crushing, metallic, industrial environment, it is the hardest thing to completely corrupt.
Yeah, the act of cooking is innocent. It can't really be pretentious if you're just trying to feed 2,000 tired people.
Exactly. While the philosophical dialogue in the book is bloated and self-serving, the physical act of cooking is an act of pure, unpretentious care. This is the duality that actually works in the novel. It's the brutal, repetitive, deafening factory work juxtaposed against this sacred, quiet act of providing nourishment.
Ladle Victor just works.
He does. He doesn't need to be right. He just needs to chop the onions, mind the heat, and pay attention to the stew.
It's the only time he gets out of his own head. So what does this all mean when we look at the big picture? We have this 350,000 character behemoth. We've explored it through 3 wildly different AI perspectives. Gemini mercilessly mocked the pretentious, I'm so deep it hurts attitude, and the absurd try-hard metaphors.
And Claude gave us this surgical, psychological diagnosis of the ego, the lack of narrative consequences, and that fascinating autobiography tax.
But then you have Grok. And Grok looks at this entire messy, bleeding manuscript, spots the profound vulnerability hidden underneath all the ego, and basically summarizes the entire 350-page experience as an autobiographical open-heart surgery performed with a ladle.
I love that quote so much.
It's so perfect. Grok recognized the raw courage it takes to put that much of your own life on the page, even if the execution was deeply, deeply flawed. The manuscript is basically an exhausting love letter to refusing to lie, wrapped in the smell of industrial stew.
It's messy.
It is messy. It is definitely pretentious, but it is also, in its own weird, defensive way, deeply honest.
It reveals the truth about the author not through its philosophical speeches, but through its flaws. The desperation to be seen as the hero tells us more about his internal state than any of his perfect comebacks ever could.
And I think that's the real takeaway for you listening right now. Whether you are writing a novel or just telling a story to your friends at a dinner party, it is incredibly tempting to view your own life with perfect clarity.
Oh, absolutely.
It's human nature to cast yourself as the hero who always has the right answer. The saint who carries the knife but never uses it unfairly. But true growth, and honestly, the only way to tell a genuinely compelling story requires us to acknowledge the times our clarity completely fails us.
We have to write the moments where the monster under the bed actually bites us. Which brings to mind a final question for you to mull over as you go about your day. If you were to sit down and write a massive, novel-length deep dive about your own life right now, what uncomfortable, unjust truth about yourself would you be most tempted to edit out just to make sure you were the one who walked away looking right in the end?